It's one of the most foundational stories of our civilization. You know the one, a single man standing against the most powerful empire on earth. It's this epic saga of tyranny and deliverance, of faith, of courage, and it's been echoing for over 3,000 years. It's a story so many of us think we know, but do we really? So the story kicks off with this epic showdown, right? A divine command is given to a tyrant, a pharaoh, holding an entire people in chains. And his response? It's just pure defiance. And that single act, it sets the stage for a confrontation that's going to bring an entire empire to its knees. You know, for most of history, this story was just accepted as fact. But today, well, today, the vast majority of scholars and experts will tell you the Exodus never actually happened. They'll say it's a powerful story, for sure, but ultimately, it's a myth. So, what is the truth here? Are we looking at a 3,500-year-old fable or a chapter of real history that we've just completely misunderstood? Okay, so let's be clear. The modern academic world has pretty much made up its mind. The consensus is the Exodus is a myth. And why? Well, it mostly comes down to a perceived lack of direct evidence. I mean, you're not going to find an inscription from a pharaoh saying, "Whoops, I lost my entire slave workforce." And there's no giant sign in the desert saying the Israelites were here. So for a lot of people, the case is closed. End of story.
But what if we've been looking for the wrong kind of evidence all along? Think about it. Ancient empires, especially Egypt, they didn't record their failures. They didn't carve their humiliations into stone. They recorded their victories. So just because we don't find a confession doesn't mean it didn't happen. Maybe we just need to stop looking for a big, flashy headline and start treating this like what it is, a 3,500-year-old cold case.
So here's how we're going to approach this. We're going to use a really simple, logical method of investigation. The story of the Exodus is fundamentally about a group of people moving from point A, that's Egypt, to point B, that's the land of Canaan. So the questions we need to ask are pretty straightforward. Can we find evidence for these people at point A before the Exodus? And can we find evidence of them suddenly appearing at point B after? All right, our investigation begins. We're starting at point A. We're going to the land of the pharaohs, to Egypt. We're looking for fingerprints, the archaeological fingerprints of a people in chains. Okay, so first, let's look at the big picture. Does archaeology actually show people from Canaan living in the exact spot the Bible calls Goshen? And the answer is a resounding yes. It's undeniable. For centuries, this whole area was just packed with their settlements, their pottery, their weapons, even their unique non-Egyptian burial styles. So the general backdrop of the story, it absolutely checks out. So that's really compelling context, right? But it's still pretty broad. I mean, we're talking about Semitic peoples in general. So let's get more specific. Can we narrow our search? Can we find evidence not just of any migrants from Canaan, but specifically of Hebrews? And this, well, this is where the case takes a fascinating turn. What you're looking at is an actual Egyptian document, a list of household servants from the 17th century BC. And on this list, there's a bombshell. Because hidden right there among all the Egyptian names are names that are distinctly, uniquely Hebrew. I mean, take a closer look. We find female versions of names like Asher and Issachar, two of Jacob's sons from the Bible. And then, you see this one? Shiphrah. That's the exact name of one of the Hebrew midwives mentioned in the book of Exodus. Think about that. Hebrew names on an official Egyptian slave list, centuries before the Exodus was even supposed to happen. Now, the story isn't just about their names. It's also very specific about the kind of work they were forced to do. They were slaves, right? Forced to make mud bricks for the pharaoh's building projects. And believe it or not, that very specific detail has a stunning parallel in the archaeological record. Okay, check this out. Inside the tomb of a high-ranking Egyptian official named Rekhmire from the 15th century BC, we find this incredible wall painting. And what does it show? It shows foreign slaves, they're clearly depicted as Semitic people, making mud bricks. It's almost unbelievable. We even have other Egyptian texts from that exact period that talk about brick quotas and really harsh punishments for not meeting them. It's like we're looking at a scene ripped right out of the pages of the biblical narrative. Okay, so we've got compelling evidence for the people. Their names, their work, it's all there. But what about the main event itself? What about the plagues? I mean, could a catastrophe on that kind of scale really happen without leaving some kind of echo, some trace in the Egyptian records? Well, this is where we find the Ipuwer Papyrus. It's this ancient Egyptian poem that describes a time of just total national chaos. And when you read it, the parallels to the biblical plagues are just startling. The poem says, "The river is blood." It talks about a time of darkness when, quote, "the sun is not seen." And get this, it actually complains that gold, silver, and jewelry are now in the hands of slaves. Now, the dating is debated, but you can't help but read it and think, this sounds like an Egyptian account of the exact same traumatic event. This brings us to the big question. Who was the pharaoh? And the leading candidate for many researchers is a guy named Amenhotep II. His own inscriptions paint a picture of an incredibly arrogant man, a perfect psychological match for the pharaoh in the story. But it's the really strange stuff that happens during his reign that makes you look twice. Partway through, he suddenly launches this massive slave raid into Canaan. Why? You have to wonder, was he trying to desperately replace a labor force that he had just lost? And then there's the question of who came after him. Amenhotep's firstborn son, the guy who was supposed to be the next pharaoh, he just vanishes from the historical record. Poof, gone. Instead, it's his younger son who takes the throne. And one of the very first things this new pharaoh does is put up this monument, this dream stele, which basically explains how the gods personally chose him to be king. Now, that's the kind of propaganda you only really need if you weren't actually the rightful heir. It's a situation that fits perfectly with that final terrible plague, the death of the firstborn. So, the evidence we have for point A, while it's circumstantial, it is pretty compelling when you put it all together. Which brings us to the next logical step. We have to turn to point B. If a massive group of Hebrew people left Egypt, did anyone notice them show up on the other side, in Canaan? And what we find next is, for me, one of the most stunning pieces of evidence in this entire investigation. The earliest known inscription of the name of the Israelite god, Yahweh. It wasn't found in Israel, it was found in Egypt. This inscription was found in an Egyptian temple, and it dates to around 1400 BC, which lines up exactly with the end of that 40-year wandering period described in the Bible. It was commissioned by the grandson of our main suspect, the Exodus pharaoh. And what does it say? It lists the nomadic peoples living to the east of Egypt, and right there in the list is a group it calls the land of the nomads of Yahweh. I mean, let that sink in. The Egyptians themselves wrote about a wandering group of Yahweh worshippers in the right place at the exact right time. And finally, the last piece of this puzzle. It's called the Merneptah stele from about 1208 BC. On it, a pharaoh is boasting about all his military victories in Canaan. He lists the cities he's conquered, and then he names a people, Israel. This is it, the first definitive, external, extra-biblical proof of Israel as an established people in the land of Canaan. Point B is confirmed. They had arrived. Now, all this historical evidence is just fascinating to dig into, but the real, enduring power of the Exodus story, it goes so much deeper than just what might have happened 3,500 years ago. It's about a timeless pattern that the story reveals, a pattern for how real, lasting transformation actually happens. You can think of it as the Exodus way. It's this three-part journey that we see over and over. First, it starts with a rescue from some kind of slavery or oppression. Then it moves into this transformative period in the wilderness, and that's a really difficult time of testing, of changing, of unlearning old habits. And finally, it ends with an invitation into a brand new life, a new way of being in a new land. It's a journey from the cage, whatever that is that enslaves us, out into the harsh, difficult landscape of the wilderness. And that wilderness, it's a place where our old habits have to die so that a new character can be forged. What this shows us is that true freedom isn't just some instant teleportation from bad to good. The journey through the hard part is just as important as the rescue out of it. So in the end, whether you see it as pure history or powerful myth, the Exodus becomes so much more than just a story about the past. It becomes this timeless pattern. It holds up a mirror, and it asks a really tough question to every generation and to every single one of us. What are you enslaved to, and what is your way out?